So today we are focused on Sage reporting. And as you are probably aware, Sage does offer a few different resources in terms of reporting. And we can edit the reports that come with the system through the Sage Report Designer. And we can also create and edit inquiries within Sage. And the benefit of an inquiry is that it provides that drill down capability that you may be looking for. We are able to see specific information on both of these reports. And you're probably aware that you also have the ability to use SAP Crystal-based reports. Using SAP Crystal, we can design our own reports that also feature those drill down capabilities. But if you have any experience with SAP Crystal, you know that there's a very steep learning curve in getting started with that. And it can become very cumbersome to edit those reports. And all three of these options will enforce your Sage security. Now, there are other reporting options out there, like Power BI or Microsoft Query or Microsoft Access. Those are all reporting options. However, we can't necessarily enforce the Sage security on the different tables from the ODBC perspective per user. And with all of these options, you need to learn the reporting tool, and you need to know something about your Sage database. And so wouldn't it be advantageous to access your data through a very familiar reporting platform, perhaps one that you're already familiar with? Well, with Sage Office Connector, we are going to unlock the power of Microsoft Excel to be used as your reporting engine, connecting directly to your Sage 300 database. Now, if you were not aware, ERP systems such as Sage 300 CRE are a great place to house your data in a secured system, allowing you to perform several functions on that data while still maintaining the integrity. Data that is saved in your system is stored in a relational database and is stored in tables like the ones you see on the left-hand side here. This is where your data resides. When you perform actions in Sage, such as paying a bill or invoicing a customer, the data on the tables are updated accordingly. And the data flow diagram on the right shows some of the Sage modules and how they will interact with one another. If you look at accounts receivable at the very bottom of that application interface, you'll see that the billing module is where those accounts receivable invoices can be generated from. And then as those customers do pay on those accounts receivable invoices, it will update the general ledger accordingly. In my opinion, the real beauty of Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate lies within the flow of the relational database. When you run reports in Sage, you run queries against these tables to assemble the data as information. And these reports come in many different flavors, as you're probably aware. And so when we talk about Excel-based reporting, you are probably aware that you have the ability to export an inquiry to Excel. And that is not what we are talking about today. What we are talking about today is much more advanced. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be connecting your Sage 300 CRE database to Microsoft Excel. Now, the disadvantage with exporting an inquiry to Excel is that the information is static, which means that if we wanted to customize a report, we would have to pull the data every time we wanted updated information. But with Sage Office Connector, we are going to empower you to create a customized report that only needs to be created once, and then we can refresh that with data as needed. Now, this next slide here will show the different pieces of Sage Office Connector. Today, we will be focusing on the query components of Sage Office Connector, and you can see how we can pull information from your Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate system into Microsoft Excel. However, Sage Office Connector can also be used for data entry, and we do have the ability to write and import those values from Microsoft Excel directly into your Sage database. However, we will be focusing on the query aspects today. There is one other piece to this equation, and that's the financials component. We do host webinars on each of these different components, including query, write, import, and financials. And if you would like to see a demonstration on any of these, put that request into the question section, and I'll be sure to follow up with the appropriate material. But again, we will be focusing on the query aspects of the program today. And with that introduction, we'll go ahead and jump on into the software here today. If you're not aware, Sage Office Connector does live within Microsoft Excel. And so if I came to Microsoft Excel and opened up a blank workbook, you can interface with the Office Connector program through the Add-ins tab here at the top of the ribbon. And these different functions and features here are where we're going to be interacting with the Office Connector program. And we'll come right back to this in a moment. But what I want to first highlight is the Office Connector Launchpad. Once you install Sage Office Connector, you will have a shortcut on your desktop, and we can also launch it from within 300 CRE. And this will provide you with some of the templates or reports that come right out of the box. And here you'll see a list of some of those reports that are available. And so we're going to start today's demonstration by jumping right into some of these reports. And I've actually already generated a couple of those workbooks. And for today, we're going to start with the Jobcost cash flow analysis by job. And so for each of the different templates that come off of the Launchpad, you will have an information page which will provide details as to the purpose of this particular report. You can see here that this template allows us to analyze the increase or decrease to cash resulting from job activity. And you can see other details giving a disclaimer as well as talking about the design. We would advise that you include your own information pages in your own reports, and we do so as a best practice. For this particular report, you can come over to the Report tab and put in a parameter as of a certain time period. You could also put in, a previous date and then put a date somewhere into the future so that you can look at future periods as well. For this example, I'm going to put in January 1st. 2015, because that's where I have demo data from. And I'm going to do that through the middle of the year. So we'll go that through 06, 30, and we'll do that for 2015 as well. You would put in a date parameter that you would be interested in. When we refresh this, the first thing we'll do is we'll select our company folder for our Sage 300 database. Keep in mind that I have already logged into my 300 CRE solution. Otherwise, it would also enforce security as well. Oh, I lied. It's having me log in right here. But it still will enforce that security. When we click refresh here, it's going to pull the data live from our 300 construction and real estate system and populate the report that we have here within Excel. And so there's no need to, re-pull the information or recreate the report when the values update. We can simply click the refresh button and it'll pull in with brand new details. And so as soon as this report populates, you'll also see how we've included some graphical elements into this particular report. One advantage of using Sage Office Connector is that we can leverage the availability of Microsoft Excel. And so it's very simple to add additional graphical elements. And this one here is showing me, the cash flow by job and then a trend line as well. Now, one of the great things about Office Connector is we do also facilitate drill down capabilities. And so that's, that's usually a desire of anyone who's looking at different reports is I want to see what makes up one of these numbers. So I could come into, February 2015 for the Northwest Food Warehouse. And what I can do is double click this number and it will pass the appropriate parameters to the Details tab down at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and double click that and it will populate this report here on the next tab, showing me the detail as to what made up the cash flow for that particular month. So it looks like I received some cash and also had some disbursements, and so you can see the amounts that make that up. But we can take this a step further to go into the transaction detail. So for example, I want to see all of the different cash receipts that make up this $26,500. We'll simply double click on that cell and you'll notice the transaction detail will fill in here down below. And looks like there's just one particular receipt for this particular transaction. We could do that for one of these disbursements as well. And perhaps there's just one disbursement, or in this case, we have several. And we can see all of the details associated to this. So that's just one example of a report that can be generated off of the Launchpad templates, and we'll jump into a couple more in just a moment. But I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists at this point in time. We do have James Coyle on with us today, who I mentioned is a product expert here. And James, was there anything you'd like to add for this particular report, this job cash flow report?
The only thing I'd like to add is that any of these on the Launchpad are starting points. So this sort of a report would have resonated with a population of customers that are desiring this, and obviously they can get into the detail. But when we talk about things like cash flow, there's a lot of different ways that people may want to see or utilize these sorts of things. And that's a common thing that people might create themselves or create with assistance or engage like professional services to help with, because there's a lot of varieties out there. Inclusive of when we talk about cash in and out, if it was like inclusive of something like accounts payable or what have you, there are optional fields in accounts payable, like on the invoice or distribution, that could be utilized to look at when something might get paid or when it might be received. So the point here is that there's just a lot you could do beyond this initial introduction of what cash flow might be. This is very useful, but there's so much more we can do as well. That's the only thing I'd like to add. Thanks, Marshall.
Yeah, thank you for the input, James. And that's a good point, that there is much more that we can do. And in a few moments, after we take a look at a couple other reports here, we will jump into the designer module. And I'm going to show kind of how the reports were created initially, as well as how you can create your own reports or modify some of these existing ones. But next, we'll jump into a cost to complete worksheet here. And so you are probably used to the cost to complete worksheets that come out of your 300 construction and real estate. But the benefit of using Excel is that we can really manipulate these numbers however we want. You can kind of think of Excel as kind of a sandbox environment in that sense. And so what we'll do here is we'll come under the administration tab. Several of these reports will have an admin tab that allow you to adjust all of the report parameters. And so this cost to complete report can be run as of a certain date and for a particular job number. And so you could also, pull in a list of your jobs and use data validations to select via a drop-down. And I could actually demonstrate that right now. What I'll do is, I don't want the user to enter a job number here. I want them to select from a list. And so one way to do that is you could come over here, and I'll just do it in column R here, is I'm going to come into the designer components and I'm going to pull in a list of all of my jobs. And so if you're familiar with the way that your database tables are structured, then you know that the jobs will be on the Jobcost job table. And so I'll type in JC space J, and we'll go ahead and select that table here. And I want to pull in all of my job numbers, and I'll pull in the description as well. So we'll go ahead and click next and then finish. So here in the column R, I have a list of those jobs here. So you could come into C5 here and leveraging, and this is just leveraging my knowledge of Microsoft Excel, you could come under data validation and limit this to, a list. And that list could be right here. And so we'll go ahead and select that and hit enter. And then what that'll do is create a drop down here so that I can just select the appropriate job. It's very easy to configure this to select the description instead, and then just put the job number in the right place, but I'll just select the job number today. We'll select that for 03001 today, and I'll keep that valid too. And you could, reorder this, so I can, take this and right click and then, sort that A to Z, so that my jobs are then in order. And so then, that's just kind of how I would operate. And then it pulls in the Northwest Food Warehouse right here. So that's just showing how I could manipulate a report that's on the Launchpad already. We'll go ahead and refresh that report. And what we'll be met with is our cost to complete report here on the next tab. And so what I'm doing now is populating this report with data that's readily available within my 300 CRE. However, I get to use the application of choice, which is Microsoft Excel. So we'll give this just another moment to populate these reports, and then I'll show one more report before we jump into the designer applications today. All right, so that did finish here. And so now we're met with that cost to complete worksheet, which you can see is showing me by cost code as well as by estimate, it's showing the commitment and cost to date. This particular report could be used to provide, your actual cost to complete for your different projects. Perhaps you're just looking at, what you've forecasted versus what's come in, but what you don't realize is that, this particular job might take another, $40,000 to complete. So if I go ahead and put in 40,000 there, then you'll notice that we actually have a cost overrun here, well, let me put in 50,000. You'll notice that when I go over, it'll actually do a cost overrun. And so we can actually put comments in here as well. And so this may be an example of a report that you want to generate and then distribute to the appropriate project manager or superintendent and have them fill in details here as to the cost to complete and the comment section so that you can see what your over under on those projects are going to be. So this would be a great report to run if we're looking to forecast our different jobs. And we can do much, much more here. You can see that some of these columns are simply, a math equation. So it's simply, one cell minus another cell. So if there was another equation or, factor that you were looking, perhaps you have a custom index, we could add this to the report very easily. You could simply right click and insert and then bring those in as necessary. And then as we enter details into these columns, Office Connector is smart enough to, when this report refreshes, to put the values into the correct places. I'll introduce James once again. James, is there anything you'd like to add to this cost to complete report that we were showing today?
Only that what someone does with this information is the second part. So there's two parts. One is what the report would look like. So this is just one flavor, but some people forecast at a lower level at the category if they use categories. Some folks forecast cost at completion or percent complete or hours to go if they're at a category level. So what this report you might desire it to look like could be different one person from another, and they can all be done. There are other reports available in Office Center that we show in various different presentations that explored the different ways. So it would start first by you looking at what you see here, evaluating it, and then thinking of the process. And again, we have presentations on this, but the process would be to assemble the information that's desirable, even if it was more than this, refresh on all your projects, and then interact and utilize it with your operational group. And I will add one other thing, that at times like this, in our present economic situation, these types of reports and how they feed a work in progress are imperative. Bonding companies, surety companies, they love this because they really need to know what's going on and examine the risk. So there's a lot we have to offer you that you should definitely be taking advantage of, and that competitive ERPs simply do not have this kind of depth that you have available to you. That's all I'd add there, Marshall.
Yeah, thank you for that input, James. That actually segues really well into the final Launchpad template I was planning to show today, which is a work in process report or a WIP report. Now, companies have different ideas of what a WIP report may look like, and so this is one example. We'll simply come in here and refresh this and select our data folder as appropriate. And with this particular report, we'll also be able to, enter in the percent of the contract earned. And so many of you are probably doing some form of progress billings for your projects, and you tend to overbill on the front end. And so if we entered in, the percent of contract earned here versus the estimate, then we can see, how much we're actually billing in excess. So, perhaps we haven't quite earned enough of that contract, and so perhaps we have billed in excess. And so you can use this report to help make those adjusting entries. And as James suggested, those cost to complete, or however you're determining that, feeds into these type reports. And so it's important to evaluate these different aspects when looking at these reports. Anything you'd like to add on the work in process report before we jump into the designer module today, James?
Only again to reinforce that this particular one may be calculating percent complete based on the cost and estimate, but most people many people will calculate it based on what they know the status of the project. So it would reflect that forecasted amount. Another point is that this is not based on a cutoff date, but there is one on the Launchpad, or it is now currently on the Launchpad available, that it has a cutoff date, so it's generated based on that. Then what people would do with this, obviously, is once you arrive at your cost to in excess or billing in excess would be entries made to your general ledger that would then come out, and that can also be automated. And we would draw your attention to presentations pertaining to write and import to talk about how we might be able to do that. That's all that I would like to add.
Yeah, that's a great little teaser there. We do also have presentations on write and import, and so as we're pulling the data into Excel, we can then enter, accurate information on the percent of contract earned, and then we can send information like this back into Sage. And as James suggested, we can help automate the process of making those adjusting entries. And so now that we have some understanding of how the Launchpad templates work, I do want to jump into a blank workbook for you all today. And this is what I'm going to showcase now is the Query Designer. And so all of the reports we've taken a look at thus far were created using the tools that I'm going to show you here shortly. And so we can also use these tools to modify the reports. I showed how we could make a slight adjustment to the report a moment ago, but what I want to do here is really showcase the Query Designer wizard. And so up here in the ribbon under the Add-ins tab, to get started with a query, you can select this button here that says Query Wizard, and this is going to help us get started. The first thing we'll do is select the data folder that we're working with. Now, earlier in the demonstration today, I had mentioned that all of your data resides in tables within 300 Construction and Real Estate. And here we have a list of all of those tables. You'll see on the right-hand side, we have the file name, or kind of what Sage will call those particular tables. But on the left-hand side here, we've gone ahead and named those tables to be a little bit easier to recognize. You'll notice that the AB will be relevant to address book, AP for accounts payable, and so on. And so if I wanted to run, say, let's say an AP invoice query, where do you think you would find AP invoice information? Well, perhaps the AP space invoice table down here. You'll notice that there are actually two invoice tables. One says master and one says new. Just think the master one will be those posted invoices. So if that's what you're interested in, you can come here and select next. And we can grab any information that's on that data table, such as a vendor number, the invoice number, the description, and other items. The little keys here refer to the key fields. And if you're familiar with database, syntax, then you know that a key field is a unique identifier. And so that will come back to the idea of a unique identifier in a moment. But what I'll do is hit the spacebar a couple times to grab some information that's here. And, all of this is going to be information on an invoice. So you may be interested in the amount or the status or the tax on those invoices, or perhaps you want to know who created the invoice, or, other information on, the date or timestamp or the accounting date there. We can pull all of that information in accordingly. I'll go ahead and select next. And this screen here is asking, do you want to pull in every single invoice, or do you want to condition which invoices you pull in? And so for this example, I'm going to first pull it in without a condition, but I'll come back to this. We'll go ahead and select next here. And this gives you the ability to name your query. It will name it for me, a query AP invoice. However, you could override this and reference it up here in the named section up here in Excel. And right here is the real beauty in Office Connector, in my opinion. We're going to insert this table that can be refreshed with live data. You do have the ability to pull it in as static. However, we're going to be working with live data here today. So I'll go ahead and click Finish. Now, my cell was here in 11, and so that's where it went ahead and put my query there. But what I'll do here is go ahead and cut it right there, and I'll put it somewhere it's a little bit easier to work with right up here. So I just moved my query there. So now I have a list of all of those invoices. And so you can see the vendor number on that, the invoice number, description, and any other details here. And one thing you could do with it is you could turn this into a Microsoft Excel table, and you could run a pivot table based on that very easily. You could simply select the information here, insert pivot table, and then you could put that on a new worksheet or decide where you'd like to put that. And then you can pull in information such as, perhaps I want the vendors on the row and I want the count of those invoices in the sum column. So here you can see a count of those invoices by vendor. You could then, take this and put some graphical elements in there. Or perhaps I see, I've got 3 invoices for this vendor. I wonder what those are. You could drill into the detail here to get a list of those specific invoices. So just showing how right from this initial query, we can start to leverage Excel to drill into the detail. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to pull additional detail from additional tables onto this report here. You'll notice that I do not have the vendor name. And so if I wanted to include that, I could simply insert a new column here and go ahead and title this vendor name. Now the vendor name was not on the invoice table, and so we can use another Office Connector function to help us locate where the vendor name may be. Now if you come here under the F of X little button here under Office Connector, you'll see all the different functions that are available in the Query Designer and some of the other applications such as Office Connector Financials. And we could either use a find or a lookup function for looking up something like a vendor name. And I'm going to use a lookup function here today, and I'll go ahead and click Insert. Now, it's asking me, what table am I interested in? Well, if you're looking for the vendor name, you might want to look on the AP vendor table. You could search for it or type in AP space V, and that'll snap you right to that table. And if I'm not sure, I could click Preview here, and I could see, okay, yes, it has the vendor number, and it's got the vendor name. So yes, this is the table I'm interested in. The next section is asking, supply the key field to be used. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that the key field will be the unique identifier. And for a vendor, the unique identifier is the vendor number. And so I could type in 100. However, if I ever copy this down, I want it to also identify whatever's here in C5. So what I'll do is I'll type in $C5. The $sign is simply an anchor field, which is Excel syntax. We'll click Next here, and it says, okay, based on that vendor number, what do you want to return? Well, I want to return the vendor name. So we'll go ahead and click Finish, and that'll go ahead and pull in the vendor name into this report here. So then I can go ahead and double click that to drop that down. Now I could come back here and grab that table once again, and now I've got the vendor name included. So I could repeat that pivot table example, and now I could pull in the vendor name, and I could pull in the count of invoices to be able to make it a little bit more usable like this previous report. But anyways, now that we've added the vendor name to this report, we can do more. We could come up here and we could, change the header. Perhaps we want to make that, a green header and bold the title there. Perhaps you want to come under the Data tab, or the View tab, rather, and remove grid lines. We can also add additional graphical elements like we talked about earlier. But what I'd like to do next is talk about how we can begin to condition this information. You'll notice that I currently have a bunch of invoices in my, in my system here. If I jump back to that pivot table, I can actually tell you I've got 597 records there. And so you might not want to look at all of these at the same time. And so what you can do then is you can add in a condition. Now, I could condition this based on the status. So just show me those invoices that are fully paid, or just show me those that are open. Just show me those invoices that have retainage that's greater than 0. Those are some examples. But what I'll do here is simply type in the vendor number. And again, you could do a validated list like I showed earlier. And then we can select the query and then condition it. We'll simply come back to the Add-ins tab and run the query wizard once again. It recognizes the query, so we're going to edit that. I'll select Next. I want all the same fields. But what we're interested now is in applying a condition. We can add a condition where any of those records on that table is equal to, or one of these other comparisons, any value. So I want to pull in just those where the vendor number equals whatever is in cell A2. So I could type in $A, $2, and then go ahead and click OK. We'll go ahead and finish here, but keep in mind I could, pull in additional information. So, perhaps I just want to see those open invoices. However, I'll go ahead and just finish for right now. Now, you didn't see it yet because it's all the same detail on the same page, but what it did is it conditioned it to just show me those invoices from a particular vendor. We could easily change this to a different vendor number and refresh our data set, so I don't have to reformat anything. It's going to pull in live details for the new vendor. Now you could create a drop-down list here, and you can actually set this to automatically refresh, and that's a function of Excel. You simply select the data set that you want to refresh, right-click, come under Parameters, and select to refresh automatically. So that way, if you switch this back to vendor 100 or to a different vendor, you'll notice that my report will refresh automatically. I did build a custom report once. It only took me about 10 minutes or so that returned a vendor with all open commitments, all open invoices, and then that allows you to take action with that information. And so it's readily available here within Microsoft Excel. James, is there anything you'd like to add in showcasing the Query Designer before we jump back into the PowerPoint presentation?
No, I think you did a great job, and it's a good starting point. If you're not familiar with the technology, if you play around with it, it'll become easier for you. If you notice, there's a blue help under add-ins on the thread, and that will take you to anytime available examples. They have movies and step-by-step instructions, and regardless of whether you see value in a vendor list or address book or lost check report, if you do these examples, they don't take long, you'll get practical experience with the sorts of things that Marshall's doing and be able to apply that to other things. So the learning curve is fast, but it's probably new to you if you've not done anything like this. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for that insight. Yeah, and there's training resources here through the help topics like James mentioned. We do also provide training as well as professional services and consulting. And well, James, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be a great panelist today and help. I hope that everybody has a great rest of your week.